Hello, all. How are y'all? Okay. Appreciate y'all being here this afternoon. Today I'm joined by two-thirds of the Senate Redistricting and Elections chairs, Senators Daniel and Newton, and a number of members of our caucus. Senator Heiss couldn't be here. He's tied up with some of the budget discussions that are taking place at the present time. Last week I gave y'all a little bit of a clue that we would be talking about the Board of Elections this week, and earlier this afternoon we introduced Senate Bill 749, which will revise the composition of the State Board of Elections and all county boards of elections in North Carolina. It will also provide for appointments from both Republican leaders and Democratic leaders of each chamber of the General Assembly. North Carolinians deserve to have confidence in the elections process. And we believe this bill moves us in that direction. And that's why you've seen Republicans in the General Assembly focus their efforts on increasing voter confidence. Unfortunately, one recent poll showed that 50% of North Carolinians think future elections will be free and fair. That is not a good situation for us to be in. That's why we need to implement common sense policies that will increase voter confidence, not just when they go to the polls. We don't have to look too far back in our state's history to see examples of the current state board of elections acting in a manner that injected suspicion into the election process. During the 2020 elections, y'all will recall the state board, with the assistance of Democratic Attorney General Stein, entered into a collusive settlement with one of the Democratic Party's preferred attorneys to change state law regarding absentee ballots after the elections process had begun and people were actually voting. Their actions back in 2020 showed a willfulness to blatantly ignore state law in favor of pursuing ways to achieve a partisan policy goal. Those actions were enabled by a board that circumvented the legislative process and caused North Carolinians to lose trust in the election process. Now we will take the necessary steps to begin rebuilding that trust. Senator Daniel will next speak, and he'll explain some of the details about the changes being made in this bill. Senator Daniel.
Thank you, Senator Berger. As Senator Berger noted, we have a duty as legislators to do what we can to rebuild the trust in the election process. So we're doing that in a two-pronged approach. First, we introduced Senate Bill 747, which includes several election integrity policy measures, including requiring absentee ballots to be received on Election Day in line with 30 other state laws, and prohibiting private donations from funding elections administration. The second being this bill, which will increase bipartisan cooperation between board members. The new composition of the State Board of Elections would incentivize compromise between members instead of giving members an opening to ram through partisan priorities. The voters of North Carolina should have faith that members of the Board of Elections can work together to conduct free and fair elections without any perception of bias. Additionally, it provides an avenue for North Carolinians who prefer not to register with a party to be appointed to the board. This proposal increases the number of board members from 5 to 8 members and provides for equal appointments from both the majority and minority parties in the General Assembly. The President Pro Tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Senate Minority Leader, and the House Minority Leader will each be tasked with appointing 2 members of the board. As with current law, the state party chairs of the 2 political parties with the largest number of registered voters would still submit names for consideration, but the leaders in the General Assembly would not be required to appoint from these lists. At the county board level, the 4 General Assembly leaders would each appoint 1 member to the local boards. The State Board of Elections would remain in charge of hiring the executive director, but if for any reason the position is not filled within 30 days of the new board members being appointed, then the General Assembly would have the opportunity to appoint the executive director. The same process would exist for appointing a chair for the State Board of Elections. As we look to the 2023 elections and the 2024 elections, it's important that the General Assembly, for us to come together to ensure that our elections administrations can work on behalf of all the voters, not on behalf of one political party or a single elected official, and that's what this bill will do. So now Senator Newton will come to the podium for some closing remarks about this bill.
Thank you, Senator Daniel. Thank you all for being here. This is an important piece of legislation to voters across North Carolina and across all parties. As we think about how decisions get made regarding elections, voters need to have the confidence in the people who are tasked with overseeing and administering elections. No one person, no one party should have exclusive control of our elections. By spreading the appointment authority between both chambers of the General Assembly and the majority and minority parties, I believe we're going to get a diverse slate of individuals who are well qualified to oversee our elections. I also want to underscore that this will allow us to include unaffiliated voters in the process. This is a structure that's similar to the Federal Election Commission. Their board has 6 members, with no more than 3 members representing one party. Because this structure has worked at the federal level, we believe it can work at the state level. We want our elections officials to decide steps to be taken based on what best balances freedom to vote with election security, not based on perceived partisan advantage. With this new structure, the board would not be able to take any action without first building a bipartisan coalition. It's incontrovertible that we're living in a time of severe political politicization and polarization, and that affects voters' perceptions of election fairness. When you have an elections board that is controlled by one party, roughly half of the voters are going to question and doubt the fairness of the elections, and in some cases, the outcome of the election. If we don't do what we can now to ensure the elections administration system is serving the voters well, those concerns could get worse. Our current system is not serving us well. There shouldn't be one party control of our elections, and in order to restore confidence in our elections, we have to take a new approach devoid of partisan bias. And that's what this bill is all about, and we're happy now to answer any questions you may have.
Take your questions. Gary.
How does eliminating the governor's appointment powers, how does that jive with Supreme Court rulings that say he needs to have control over boards so that he can ensure the laws of the state are effectively carried out?
Yeah, so it's our belief that elections are a category that would require there not to be a particular control of one individual or another, and having a bipartisan board of elections, we think, will comply with the Constitution.
As a follow-up,
Go ahead.
you read Berger v. Cooper. I mean, that seems to run. I'm not a lawyer, but I've followed this stuff a lot. Could you explain
So,
that?
which Berger v. Cooper, or is it McCrory v. Berger?
Well, I mean, they're all connected, but I mean, Berger v. Cooper.
Right. And I think on that decision, there were some instances in that decision, I believe, and pointed out by the dissenting opinions that that decision may very well have been wrongly decided in some respects. And we don't think that the issue that would be brought forward with this legislation has been decided by the court. So it's kind of a two-tiered. The changes in the state board would become effective upon the legislation becoming law. At the local board level, it would not take place until January of 2024. Did not want to do anything that would disrupt the local elections that are taking place across North Carolina this year.
A follow-up, that seems like a lot on the state board along with getting voter ID in place. Do you think that that's all feasible
So don't see where anything in this bill changes administratively what the state board or the local boards would be doing in terms of administering the local elections.
Similar idea was on the ballot in 2018. It was pretty unpopular. I think voters shot it down in a 2-1 margin. What can y'all do to convince people in the state that this is the right idea this time around?
So it's our belief that that the people think that and believe rightly that elections should be free from partisanship in terms of their administration, and the fact that that we would not have a partisan majority in the elections administration would address any concerns that voters might have. The present situation is one that we think creates some of the suspicion that's out there by having one party having control over the elections administration process.
So now that there will be more of an even number on the board, are you guys worried about there being issues in terms of getting things done when there is an agreement?
So the board's required to administer the law of North Carolina. It is our concern that under the present makeup of the board, what we're seeing is the board changing the law. We've seen instances of that actually happening. We think that an even-numbered board would be required to work together, and to the extent that administration decisions need to be made, they will be able to coalesce around the appropriate decisions there. To the extent that one party or the other wants them to make a purely partisan decision, we think this keeps that from happening.
What do you say to people who believe that this is more of a power grab?
So I don't see how anyone could use that terminology in a situation where we would be providing for half of the members of the board to be in each party. What you describe would be if the General Assembly or if Republicans were to replace the current situation and have Republicans having a majority on the board. That is not what we're doing here.
Unless there's a tie, in which case the legislature.
Only as to the selection of the executive director. And remember, the executive, and they would be subject to decisions of the board itself. They would not be, if they're following the law, they would not be actually implementing decisions that were inconsistent with either the law or with a decision of a majority of the board.
My question first with this relates to that. So say the county boards have got to decide whether or not voting sites are going to be they deadlock, that's going to the state board, they deadlock, now what?
Invariably, you see it in every election where if a decision is made at the local level to either keep polls open or not to keep polls open, the next step is the local Superior Court judge. I suspect you'll still have that situation.
And then I guess following up on what you were saying before in response to the question of the previous constitutional amendment. So are you suggesting that if voters got this proposal again, there would be a different result? Didn't voters already say this is not?
This is not the proposal that was presented to the voters before. An even board was presented to them, but this proposal was not presented to them.
You said the parts of the state board would go into effect once the bill passes. Would that mean that the current state board members would not finish out their terms?
That's correct. Unless they were reappointed but the current terms would expire. Other questions? Oh, sorry.
On the provisions about appointing the directors, basic game theory would suggest that the chair simply will be, appointing both the state executive director, the county chairs, and the deadlock within, the timeline suggested is pretty likely. Don't you think?
We'll have to wait and see. I don't necessarily agree that that's the preordained outcome.
What you thought about the governor's, the recommendations made today about UNC board governance? Are you familiar with top lines of what those were? Does it have any chance for discussion or legs here?
Understand that a recommendation came out today. I've not had a chance to review them. What I would say is that as long as any recommendations are consistent with what the Constitution sees as the role of the General Assembly in managing the state's higher education infrastructure, then we'll look at that. If it's looking to do something that is inconsistent with what the Constitution calls for, I'm not sure that we would be inclined to go in that direction.
Pointed out earlier that state boards are already going to have to implement photo ID and then potentially some other new regulations when absentee ballots are accepted. Do you have any update on if they're going to be getting any extra funds in the budget proposal to implement all of this?
We're in the process of having conversations with the House and trying to reconcile differences between the House and the Senate budget. I'm not familiar with where our conferees are on that particular issue. The House House leadership has indicated that they are in favor of the provisions of the bill that deal with the State Board of Elections. I think we're still having conversations about the local boards. Other questions?
To return to the UNC thing, I mean, you've noted several times the Constitution authorizes the General Assembly power. I mean, that's what you're saying, right?
Correct.
If it's shifting appointments in a way y'all don't like, it stands no chance.
Constitution places that responsibility in the General Assembly. I do not see us going back to the way things were.
What about if it's Democrats in the General Assembly getting some?
They, under our current process, have the opportunity to nominate and to vote, and the General Assembly, like all democratically elected bodies, acts through majorities. And so I don't know that we would have any set-asides for particular parties or particular individuals.
Final question? Do you expect to move on this week?
It is my expectation that both the 747 elections bill and this bill should have a hearing in the Senate this week. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Where you drive?